Hello, I'm Stuart Mendoza from Immaculata University. This presentation is on the decline of the Mayan civilization. During this presentation, we will cover the various theories that have been suggested on how the Mayan civilization collapsed. We will explore on who were the Mayans. It's essential to understand who the Mayans were at the peak of their civilization and why their collapse was such a mystery. Then we'll cover the ecosystem, the relationship between the early Maya and the environment, and the changes of their ecosystem. Then we'll go into the drought. Was it the drought that caused them to fall? The 1,000-year migration cycle. Did overpopulation cause tensions to result in war? Let's find out. Theories. The Mayan was far beyond its time in comparison to other cultures in mathematics, architecture, and astronomy. However, scholars cannot agree with how this fantastic civilization disappeared. The Mayan civilization is the most significant mystery of the ancient world. There are many conjectures and years invested by scholars as to how the Mayan civilization declined so abruptly has left researchers to conclude different interpretations, such as the ecosystem. The Mayans had an eat, slash and burn architectural method to clear land. The most prominent one at the moment is the drought theory, the environmental factor that ultimately brought down this empire. Then there's the overpopulation theory. In the Mayan civilization, it led to crop failure. So during this time, there was an increase in demand in agricultural produce, which forced the farmers to reduce their fallow period, which we'll get to here in a few, which increased deforestation through the slash and burn method, and over-reliance in mice. This left the crops vulnerable to pests and resulted in crop failure. Then we have the warfare, rebellions, signs of siege of warfare, an escalation of militarism involving the general population in a desperate fight for survival. Who were the Mayans? The Maya were a Mesoamerica civilization. Mesoamerica is a geographical area defined by its ancient culture, spanning through the tropical rainforest from the Caribbean Sea to the highlands of El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, Belize, and Mexico. This was the heart of classic Mayan civilization. It organized into a network of cities and states that ranged across the entire Yucatan Peninsula. The Maya developed one of the most advanced civilizations in the Americas. They developed the written language of hieroglyph and invented the mathematical concept of zero. With their expertise in astronomy and mathematics, the Maya developed a complex and accurate calendar system. They used a non-repeating long count calendar as shown to predict the 2012 phenomenon. Over the following 2,500 years, Mayan polities rose and fell, some larger and more powerful than others. Most of these kingdoms existed for hundreds of years, and a few endured for 1,000 years or more. To understand and follow this long development, the Maya civilization is divided into three periods: the pre-classic, the classic, and the post-classic. The pre-classic includes the origins and apogee of the first Mayan kingdoms. The classic is defined as the highest point of the Mayan civilization in architecture, art, writing, and population size. The post-classic saw the revival of the Mayan civilization beginning in 1900 CE, but was cut short by the Spanish conquest. The Maya created a sophisticated agricultural system, supplemented by forests, rivers, and seashores, to support a population that reached into the tens of millions. The Mayan excavated canals, showing an irrigation system that adapted to highlands and lowland environments. Every Mayan polity was composed of an impressive display of communities, large and small. The largest city served as the capital of independent kingdoms, containing the most elaborate temples, palaces, markets, causeways, reservoirs, plazas, and ball courts. In all Mayan cities, there were hundreds to thousands of homes for common people. The Maya were deeply religious and worshipped various gods related to nature, including the gods of the sun, the moon, rain, and corn. At the top of the Maya society were the kings and holy lords, who claimed to be related to the gods and followed a hereditary succession. They were thought to serve as mediators between gods and people on earth, and performed the elaborate religious ceremonies and rituals. The ruling class was also expected to provide material, spiritual, ideological security, given that they controlled vital resources, trade, military power, and advanced knowledge such as literacy, math, astronomy, and engineering. The Maya developed astronomy, calendrical system, and hieroglyphic writing. The Maya were noted as well for elaborate and highly decorated ceremonial architecture, including the temple pyramid, palace, and observatories. Ecosystem. A current hypothesis speculates that this decline was due to ecological and environmental problems. The Mayans were resourceful people. According to Robert Scherer, professor at the Department of Anthropology of University of Pennsylvania, the Mayans had an advanced, diverse, and productive agricultural system that included irrigation, terracing, drained fields of swamps and shallow lakes. So the lack of knowledge on how to benefit from limited resources was not the case for the lowland Mayans. When they found new land, the farmers cleared the jungles using a slash and burn method and grew their significant crops. Deforestation was a prevalent practice in the central Mayan lowlands. Even though soil erosion and crop failure may paint an incomplete picture for the demise of the classical Mayan civilization, there is growing evidence that the scale of modern forest removal reduces local and regional precipitation. In other words, deforestation, either by hurricanes, climate variabilities, or persistent slash and burn, leads to an increased surface temperature and reduces the amount of rainfall in the region. Deforestation also reduces the amount of phosphorus, a nutrient necessary for vegetations, available in the soil, because only the forest canopies can capture it from the environment and make it readily available. The Maya unknowingly built their temples and structures on fertile land, leaving them with limited land to farm. They farmed on mountainous areas, cut small fields into the hillside, and held it with retaining wall. These created a series of steps to reduce water runoffs and erosion, allowing them to plant maize and secondary crops, such as beans, squash, and tobacco. After 2 years, they would move their fields into a new location, allowing the old fields to lay fallow for 10 years before reusing them. But there were consequences. Due to non-fertile soil the farmers were limited to, they had no choice but to plant on the mountainside. When it rained, the soil would run down the mountain, losing its little nutrients it already had. Corn was the main crop to grow. The lack of proper nutrients had biological consequences to the Maya. They were 70% anemic. They lacked the iron, which caused them to have low immune system to protect them from viruses and bacteria. Drought. Did the Mayan civilization end due to a drought or an environmental disaster? A new study confirms that it was a combination of the two. Climate change. According to the earth scientist Andrew Droxler from Rice University, a shift in the intertropical conversion zone, a weather system that generally dumps water on the tropical regions of the world while drying out the subtropics, traveled further, missing the Yucatan Peninsula. This event caused the Mayans' predictable raining season to vanish suddenly. This unprecedented weather event was not for one season. It was on record to be decades. Advanced research was conducted, revealed new results, strengthened the case that dry periods were indeed a culprit. That is because the data that came from several spots in the region of central Mayan heartland. Lake Chichicanab is a lake in Mexico, located in the northwest of the state. It's the largest lake in the Yucatan Peninsula. A research conducted by the Association for the Advancement of Science took core samples of the sediments from the lake to measure the minerals called gypsum. It's an evaporite mineral mostly commonly found in layered sedimentary deposits. They found that the ratio between the sediments during that time was much smaller, showing that there was less annual rain, 41 to 70% less, for close to 95 years. Other locations were tested, the Blue Hole of Lighthouse Lagoon, as well as the Rhomboid Reef. The Mayan used these resources to sustain their agriculture, with their primary source of life. A growing population, drought, and crop failure may have led to the severe shortage and malnutrition. When crops failed, people moved elsewhere to survive. The Mayans had a system on how many years they would move, referred to as micro and meso-level cycle, in which Mayan government changes. The first level of movement was the micro-level cycle, which was to move to a new site every 256 years, where the Mayan would have a ceremonial center, determined by the Mayan to be the number of years to sustain in a livable environment. At the end of 256 years, there would be a ceremonial abandonment of the capital. They were allowing the land to regenerate to provide future growth and following on to another site for an additional 256 years. The Mayans started in the northern Yucatan for about a century, comprising of 4 cycles of 256 years. Once a completed cycle met its 256 years, the Mayan would move to another region for another century. Maya was a civilization that was much larger than anything ever imagined, 13 million. More and more arable lands were taken up by growing cities to continue to swell in size, partly owing to the influx of people arriving from the outside regions. Within each Mayan kingdom, society was organized hierarchically, including kings, nobles, teachers, scribes, warriors, architects, administrators, artisans, merchants, laborers, and farmers. Besides the capital, outlying subsidiary sites ranged from sizable towns down to the hamlets and extended family farming compounds. Every Mayan piety was composed of small villages to large cities that served as collaborators to each independent capital and kingdom. The rulers were the gatekeepers of wealth and knowledge in the region. The social contract that existed between the elites and the rest of the citizens demanded that the elite ruling class provide material, spiritual, and ideological security, all of which was difficult to achieve due to the exogenous climatic factors. By the end of the late classic periods, the ruling elite were no longer able to support and deliver their social promises, which include forests, resource management, water capture and retention, sustained monument buildings, and financing of military. This complex interplay of human-environment interaction ultimately forced the peasants, artisans, and others to abandon their homes and cities to find better economic opportunities elsewhere, resulting in significant depopulation and city abandonment. Beliefs and ideas about hierarchical methods of organizing society have infiltrated the Mayan population. The late pre-classic period and emergence of Aau, a political rulership title from the Mayan civilization, and the rise of kingship through the Mayan lands for the next 1,000 years. From excavated stones in art and text, point to the surprising conclusion that the Mayan were one of the most violent state-level societies in the New World. Various writings and artifacts indicate continual raiding and warfare between the elite and adjacent city-state, and also the practice of ritual bloodletting and human sacrifice. The signs of siege warfare indicate an escalation of militarism involving the general population in a desperate fight for survival. Conclusion. It all began with the shift of an intertropical conversion zone, a weather system causing the Mayans to relocate their farms. The relationship between all these events must be taken in consideration for both endogenous and exogenous factors, whose complex interplay was necessary for the bring down the civilization. A 95-year drought with the multiple causations of a cataclysmic decline of the ancient civilization.